Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Inciting Incident. I'm your host, Tim Shields. Today, we have my friend, Dr. Anna Yusim. Dr. Anna is an internationally recognized, award-winning, board-certified Stanford and Yale-educated psychiatrist and executive coach with a private practice in New York City, Connecticut, New Jersey, Colorado, California, and Florida. With clients including Fortune 500 CEOs, Olympic athletes, A-list actors and actresses, and the chairs of academic departments at top universities, Dr. Anna helps influential people achieve greater impact, purpose, and joy in their life and work. Dr. Yusim is also the best-selling author of Fulfilled, How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier and More Meaningful Life. As a clinical assistant professor at Yale Medical School, Dr. Yusim is presently working to create the Yale Mental Health and Spirituality Center. How cool is that? Which will be a bridge between the Yale Medical School and Yale Divinity School. She's published over 400 academic articles, book chapters, scientific abstracts, book reviews, and articles for the lay public on various topics in psychiatry. A frequent contributor to CNN, Fox News, ABC, and NBC, she has been a guest on hundreds of national and international TV shows, radio programs, and podcasts. Dr. Yusim is the Chief Medical Officer of Conscious Health, a holistic mental health treatment center based in California that bridges ancient psycho-spiritual wisdom with state-of-the-art evidence-based mental health interventions like ketamine, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and other treatment modalities. She is the medical lead for Supermind, a mental health startup based in Miami that utilizes personal coaching, binaural beat meditation technology, and an EEG-based biofeedback system to create targeted precision mental health therapy for depression, anxiety, and PTSD. She is also on the board of numerous other enterprises in the mental health space, including Being Health, Play and Pause, plus Purpose. Now, this is the interesting part, and well, that's all interesting, but this is what I am interested in because I'm always interested in the human journey behind the work. So, after working as a neurobiology researcher with Dr. Robert Sapolsky, PhD, and completing her studies at Stanford University, Yale Medical School, and the NYU Psychiatry Residency Training Program, Dr. Yusim felt that something was missing from her life. In her quest to find it, she traveled, lived, and worked in over 70 countries while studying Kabbalah, learning Buddhist meditation, and working with South American shamans and Indian gurus. Wowzers. Here we go. So, I think a good place to start was, where were you and did you have any idea who you were going to be when you were 17 years old?
It's so great to be here with you today, Tim. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And that's a great question. And, I often say that had anyone told me 25 years ago where I would be or that I would even be a spiritual person, I would have laughed. Spirituality, when I was 17 years old, as you said, it was the furthest thing from my mind. I was in high school, the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I was a big nerd. I was actually on the math team. I come from a long line of mathematicians in my family. And so I had a passion for math as well, followed it to this school. And I would spend so much of my free time sitting alone in a room doing math contest problems. That would bring me so much joy. And I wanted to be a mathematician, as so many of my family members had been. Spirituality was not part of this equation. So then I went to Stanford, started on the math team there, started taking math classes, but then realized at Stanford, the majority of math classes were taught by TAs who barely spoke English. And so my passion for math starts to dwindle because I can barely understand what's being said. And I'm like, well, I don't think I'm going to be a mathematician after all. That was really a life-changing thing for me. And then one of my girlfriends at Stanford, she had a book in her room, and it was a book by Irvin Yalom called Lying on the Couch. And one day I picked up this book and started reading it, and I was so enraptured by Dr. Yalom and by this book. Dr. Yalom's an existential psychotherapist, a psychiatrist at Stanford, and he writes in detail about the lives of his patients from this philosophical existential lens. And as I was reading this, I was just so taken by this. I was so taken by the philosophy of it, by his depth and capacity to understand human nature in such a profound way. And I thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to understand people with this depth. I want to follow a similar path. I want to become a psychiatrist. I want to write about my patients. I want to understand people through this philosophical lens. And ultimately, that is what I did. So at the age of 17, it was furthest from my mind, spirituality, and it only came much, much later.
Do you think that when you read that book by him, it was kind of mirroring yourself? Like, I want to know who I am?
100%.
Or were you not even there yet?
100%.
Okay.
Yes. I feel like, I, as many people, am a complex person with much nuance, and it's an understanding that I continue to gain over time. And so even now, I am continuing to learn this, even though I've been a psychiatrist for many years. And it's a constant evolving process. And absolutely, my desire to understand human nature also was a desire to better understand myself.
So college and then post-grad, where did you go to post-grad, and what did that open up for you?
Yeah. So in college at Stanford, I switched to pre-med and biology. So I actually did biology and philosophy because I love how the brain works, how the mind works. I love also philosophy is really understanding human nature. And so I studied philosophy and ethics and really, really love that. Then I took a few years off. I became a management consultant to take a break from academia, to take a break from school, traveled the world, learned about business, learned a ton. It was like probably the best decision I made to take a break from, the academic path. And then I went to Yale Medical School to become a psychiatrist, essentially. And still spirituality wasn't at all part of my path. And then I went to NYU to actually pursue my residency. And it wasn't until the end of my NYU residency that spirituality entered into my life in a more prominent way.
So how old were you when you took your break, travel, and where did you go? Because obviously travel is one of the most formative experiences we can have, especially in my life.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I could not agree more. I took two such breaks. One of them was actually right after Stanford. So before becoming a management consultant, I took 2 months in backpack through Europe, and it was amazing. And then at Yale Medical School, everybody's encouraged to take a year off to write a thesis. So in my year to write my thesis, I took 2 months and backpack through Asia. And that was amazing. So those experiences were, for me, the most important experiences in taking off my mask completely and just really figuring out who am I underneath all of the expectations that everybody has of me. Who am I separate from what other people believe me to be? Who am I at my core? And somehow being outside of my regular setting enabled me to ask that question in a really profound way and explore the answer to that question with all of the different people that were coming into my life.
When my mom passed away, I bought a one-way ticket to India, and then I was traveling Southeast Asia for an entire year. So it's sink or swim. You got to figure it out by yourself. And everybody, well, in life, everybody's a mirror. But what kind of insights did you garner into yourself during that period?
The insights I garnered were that I'm very predisposed to being a people pleaser. Meaning that the expectations of others, because I had parents and was very who I loved very much and who loved me very much. They were amazing parents. And I got a lot of reward for being a good girl, right? So I had all of this incentive to do that, often at my own expense and detriment to my authenticity. And so these travels were often my ways of tapping into myself and asking the question of who am I really? And what do I most deeply want, separate from all the other voices of all the other people in my life, including.
So I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you said this, but I'm just curious, what age was that?
Yeah. So the first trip was 22. So right when I finished.
Oh, wow.
Right. And then the second trip was when I was in medical school. So it was 25, 26, something like that.
Pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
So then you get out of medical school and you're just going along kind of the predictable path. Is that right? And then what was the inciting incident, let's say, that made you pause and kind of reorient your whole work and life?
Yeah. So I was in medical school then. And then, and then I completed that, went into residency at NYU. And I really, really loved medical school at Stanford. I loved college medical school at Yale, and I loved college at Stanford. I did not love my residency at NYU. It was just like, there was a million things about it that I did not love. And then I kept questioning. I'm like, am I even doing the right thing? Maybe I need to end it here. And I was in a long-term relationship with somebody, and then we broke up at the time. So it was a lot of things all going on. And it was a little bit of my dark night of the soul. And in that context, I just felt like dark and lonely. And here I was learning to be a psychiatrist with supposedly all of these tools under my belt to help people. And yet I couldn't use these tools to help myself. And so it made me wonder, I'm like, well, what exactly am I entering? And if the tools of my profession are insufficient to help me out of what I'm feeling, how am I going to help other people? Perhaps I need to broaden my arsenal. And that's what led me to then think, maybe I need to look outside of these tools. And as I was thinking this, spirituality was coming into my life. Like, that seemed to be like something greater than me. As they often say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And many different teachers came into my life all at once during that time. And a lot of the teachers were also just experiences. Like, I remember, so after I broke up with my long-term relationship, I started dating this other person. And I remember a psychic comes up to me in like an ice cream shop with a psychic with a child. And she says to me, I have a message for you. I'm a psychic. And I was like, okay, give me your message. And she starts telling me all of these truths about my life that she couldn't possibly know. It's like she's been reading my mind. And these are not things I'd even written in my journal. They certainly weren't on Facebook. I don't even think Facebook existed at that time. And this person was just telling me all of these things. And I was like, that's so strange. How did this woman possibly know this? And so it made me think, wow, maybe our minds work a little bit differently than I've been taught in medical school. We're taught that all of our minds are separate and distinct. And here is this person literally reading my mind, like, and who I've never met before. Who is this person? So these things started happening. And then I had a dream, and the dream was of a sign that said Kabbalah reveal. And then I was, a few weeks later, I was walking down to dinner with a friend, and I see the exact sign from my dream, Kabbalah reveal. And it's the New York City Kabbalah Center. So I walk in and I take a class, I signed up to take a class, and Kabbalah ends up being one of the most important spiritual influences at the start of my spiritual path. And it gives me a lot of the answers to the questions that I had been pondering. So it's been very interesting. It's not as much of a part of my life now, because I feel like that was maybe 10 years, and now I'm doing other spiritual traditions, but it was a very important influence. And so that's kind of how it started in.
That's wild. So you were kind of this total left brain, classically trained person, and then a psychic walks up to you and tells you all this stuff, and that kind of cracked the nut and opened everything up.
Exactly.
That is wild.
Exactly.
I love that. Mm-hmm. I was talking to another psychiatrist, Dr. Tara Delaberto, and I asked her, like, did you see the spiritual breadcrumbs lining up? And she said, and she was an atheist, and then she had this, kind of Kundalini awakening, and she said there were no breadcrumbs until I had that moment. She just did, and then as soon as it happened, boom, all these things started lining up. So what kind of started lining up for you? And who were these teachers, and how did they influence you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it was a number of things. Number one, I met this person and was convinced, okay, that this is the soulmate. And then I found Kabbalah. And Kabbalah has this whole teaching on, here's how you meet your soulmate. So it was like really interesting. It was like a certain need was met at a specific time. Here was, somebody that I had met, and then here was the exact teaching that I needed about this. So it was very interesting. And so I had a Kabbalah teacher that was very helpful with this process. I did not end up with this person, by the way, but it was the whole process and the transformation that I went through by virtue of it was incredible. And so I'm very grateful to this person for that. And so that was number one. But then with Kabbalah, everything started to open, like little synchronicities left and right, and they haven't stopped until now. Now, essentially, life is full of synchronicities. And as you know, Tim, so I've written one book on the science of spirituality. I'm writing another book on the science of miracles. And what a miracle is, it's just another version of a synchronicity, but bigger in form and stature, usually. And as I define a miracle, it's something highly beneficial yet statistically improbable, which essentially is what a synchronicity is. But if you live in that space where, miracles and synchronicities happen all the time, it's not something improbable. It's actually more probable than it is improbable. It's happening all the time everywhere. It's just about seeing it and being able to draw that in and magnetize more of that into your life.
Yeah. I actually have on my phone, it says, I am realistic. I expect miracles. That's my screensaver. Yeah.
That's exactly it. That's exactly how I live. And that's exactly kind of how life then responds to you. You live that way and you draw that in, and that's what life becomes.
So Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, right? Is that correct?
Yes. It comes from a Jewish lineage, but there's also Christian Kabbalists. There's also from a lot of other traditions as well. So it usually does come from the Judeo-Christian lineage, but the Kabbalah Center was very open to people of all ethnicities learning this. And, Kabbalah used to be such that it could only be studied by people over the age of 40, men who devoted their whole life to the study of Torah, who were married with children, etc. And so the founder of the Kabbalah Center saw it as his mission to open this knowledge up to everybody in the world. And so that's why I was able to study, some of this, and as many people are as well.
So what were some of the other spiritual breadcrumbs along the way from Kabbalah to, let's say, to the realization of what your book became? Like, what was that time and space all about?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you some of the Kabbalistic principles that were like
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. One of the principles is in science, as I was taught, everything that you see with your eyes and hear with your ears, that's 100% of reality. Whereas in Kabbalah, that's only 1% of reality. The seen and heard is only 1% of what is real. 99% is unseen and unheard. It exists in this other realm. And actually, quantum physics supports that and supports many other dimensions in which, things occur, essentially. And so that was one of the fundamental differences. And then there are all the principles of what do you need to do to elevate your consciousness? And those principles are going against your nature, doing that which is most difficult for you. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm a psychiatrist, and in psychiatry, we have many different tools and principles as well, depending on the kind of orientation. There's cognitive behavioral, there's existential, there's psychodynamic, there's interpersonal, all with very different philosophies. But what I was learning in Kabbalah was different. I hadn't heard these psycho-spiritual principles before. So it was really, really useful as a psychiatrist to start to get these additional tools to be able to use in my own life and in my life with patients.
Huh. I have this in my new work called Dream Tethering. I have this new model of self-actualization I called the circlotron, because I think self-actualization is a dynamic state of expansion and contraction, as opposed to it existing in the top of a triangle in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I won't go fully into it, but every circle represents a level of self-actualization. And to get to the next level of self-actualization, you have to overcome one of three things: fear, trauma, or limited thinking. Does that line up with kind of Kabbalah or any of your stuff?
Absolutely.
Moving into the next thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Exactly. And my, what is fear essentially? My favorite mnemonic on fear is false evidence appearing real. The majority of our fears are just illusions. And when we recognize that, and then we're able to let fear take the passenger seat as opposed to the driver's seat, and we begin to drive. And it's about coming into relationship with fear, and not to, push fear away because what we resist persists, but welcoming in the fear and learning from the fear what it is there to teach you and who you are by virtue of it. So that's the fear. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Hey,
go ahead. When I was probably in my 20s, early 20s through, maybe 28 or something, I went to quite a few different therapists, and probably two or three of them were always like, you live in your head, you have to be in your body. And I'm like thinking like, what does that mean? Instead of like actually embodying it. Was that any kind of realization for you that you have to kind of bring all this knowledge into our embodiment?
Oh yeah, that's actually huge. And there's a lot of somatic experiencing and a lot of therapies and theories like that. But interestingly, much of psychiatry, what you're taught in residency, isn't really about living as much in your body. It's more about your thoughts. It's more about your mind. And that's the whole thing. This is actually my criticism of current psychiatry, right? It's when we think about it, the primary framework that psychiatry focuses on is the mind and the brain. The brain through psychopharmacology, psychiatric medication, and the mind through psychotherapy. What is missing here is the body and the spirit. That's often not as much touched by current psychiatric framework. So I love that you had healers and doctors who were actually telling you to become more embodied. What we need right now within psychiatry is more embodied practices. And embodiment means so many different things. Embodiment means relationship to your diet and nutrition. So healthier nutrition, healthier sexuality and pleasure for people to like be connected to that, for people to be out in nature, people to be connected to longevity and fertility. Those things are often connected. And everything else that basically are part of your embodied awareness that's often overlooked. Exercise, physiology. Often, all of these things are often overlooked by modern psychiatry. And so the other part is spirit, which is, the spiritual world that I'm focusing on in my work a lot.
Yeah. I woke up this morning at about 5:15 and I was laying there and I was like, well, I might as well get my day started. So I got up and I came out here and I meditated, and I haven't thought too much more about it to articulate it. But I mean, first of all, the pretext is in this dimension, it's about the body. The body is the vessel and the vehicle to have these experiences, to embody, to turn knowledge into wisdom. And I mean, it was a weird thing that came in, but it was like, I haven't practiced Catholicism in years or something, but it was like, when you get the Eucharist, this is my body. And what do they call the Eucharist? The host. So we actually, I haven't thought too much more about it, but we are the Eucharist and we are the host of this spiritual information in this dimension.
I love that. I think that's exactly right. And I think that when we forget to focus on the body, so many things could happen, right? We could be so much in our heads. We can actually be leaving our bodies constantly, like living up here. Our spirit could be here. And that's what happens if people are super intuitive, super psychic, and for all sorts of other reasons. And, I also often have been told by intuitives that I live above my body. So I often have to remember to be embodied, whether through a mindful meditation practice or just focusing on different parts of the body in order to ground, or actually through other grounding practices, or through connecting to nature, or getting away from technology and things like that.
I was going to ask you, how do you get somebody I used to be that way. I still am in a lot of ways, but I feel much more embodied at this age than obviously when I was in my 20s. But how do you get somebody from their mind into their body? How do you get that integration? Because you need the mind, body, and the spirit working in tandem. Because when one is out of balance, everything else gets out of balance.
Definitely. And I think, it's the things that I mentioned, like, first of all, it's about grounding. It's learning how to ground. And there's many different ways to ground, including going into nature and actually putting your feet on the earth and grounding through that. There's also grounding sheets. I sleep with grounding sheets at night. You could have grounding sheets and things that essentially connect you to the earth. Laying flat, face down on the earth, or connecting to a tree, connecting to elements of the earth. Those are all ways of grounding. Walking in a forest is a way of grounding. That's number one. Number two is, obviously setting your intention. That's super important. Being able to have the intention of, I would like to be in my body. And then doing things such as focusing on different body parts, and then being able to breathe in and out of your stomach, breathe in and out of your heart, breathe in and out of your throat, breathe in and out of your forehead, and actually connecting to your body through your breath. And then there's also certain foods. Eating heavier foods grounds you, so those are just a few of the things, but there's much, much more.
So I remember you told me one or two stories about your patients, and for lack of a better term, something happened outside of time and space, and it kind of turned I think somebody was thinking about committing suicide or something like that. And do you know what story I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on a Kabbalah trip, and we were at the grave sites of some of the great Kabbalists in Ukraine and Poland. And I remember one night I woke up in the middle of the night in a start, feeling like something was really, really wrong. And I had no idea what was going on, but I was feeling like I was having a midnight panic attack. I'd never had a midnight panic attack, but patients have described those. I was like, something is just off. And I felt compelled at that moment to check my email. And I realized that 1 minute prior to having woken up, one of my patients had texted me or emailed me, letting me know that he was feeling suicidal. And so this is a patient who at that time, I was in the Ukraine. This was 10 time zones and 5,000 miles away. And somehow or another, I got this message and woke up in the middle of the night to be able to field this, email. And by virtue of having received this email, I was able to call this patient and literally and figuratively talk him off the ledge. And thank goodness he was okay. And what would have happened had I not woken up? Maybe he still would have been fine, or maybe he wouldn't. We just don't know. But that for both myself and the patient was such an important experience and just such a huge thing that somehow or another, there's something taking care of us, even if we're 5,000 miles away. And even if, we're asleep, something, if we need to be awakened, we will be awakened. Like this is one of those synchronicities that ended up being so meaningful to both myself and to my patient.
And that that sort of altered your view. And did you have more of those experiences?
I had a million experiences like that with patients, not anything as dramatic where like it was a patient who was suicidal and I woke up in the middle of the night on the other side of the world, but many things like this. Like I had a patient who had a dream about me, about something that actually happened in my life that he couldn't possibly have known. And he dreamt that. I've had dreams about things happening in my patients' lives. And later they told me about those things. Within the context of therapy with a patient, things have happened in the room when somebody has passed in the family. So at one point we were talking about a loved one who had just passed to one of my patients in my room, and my door buzzer fell off the wall. And that might seem like a nothing thing, but it's never fallen off my wall before or after. And it fell off my wall at exactly the moment that we started talking about the person who passed. And so that little synchronicity was particularly meaningful to my patient. And we both interpreted it as this being, the significant other who passed, who was giving some sort of message that they were okay. And that was very, very powerful for my patient. And many things like this.
If you're not open and of that mind frame, then you're just like, oh, that's weird. But when you start to open yourself up to kind of the mystery, these are these little breadcrumbs. And, in my first book, in this next book, a breadcrumb on its own means nothing. It just leaps out of into your awareness with a registering force, and it causes you to pause, and you're like, oh, that was weird. But then you start to attune yourself to these, and they start lining up, and they start showing you a path and becoming a guide for you. What are there some pretty big spiritual breadcrumbs that you can kind of connect throughout your, let's say from your awakening to where you are now? Even talking about your book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the book, and then we're making a film, and the right people coming into my life at the right time. And, those sorts of things happen. And then you just realize that there's so much more guidance even than we think. There's like so much more guidance out there, and you never have to worry about anything in a sense. You can put out intentions and work for the things that are important to you, but you will be guided. I feel like that's like the main breadcrumbs, that there's always the guidance that comes at the first minute, at the last minute, whenever you need it. And you have to still work on yourself and work on it. But if you're doing good things for the world and are aligned with your mission, the universe is going to want to support you.
We met through the Dr. Joe Dispenza community. When did you do that, and what brought you to that? Curiosity, or were you trying to fix or heal something? Because everybody goes there with some sort of intention.
Exactly. I was very curious, and I knew that a lot of people were doing Dr. Joe's work. specifically, to elevate their consciousness. And I remember feeling like, okay, you know what? Maybe I'll try. And for me, I want to know all of the amazing spiritual things that are out there. And Dr. Joe's was certainly part of that. And I remember going and feeling like this amazing upliftment, and afterwards feeling like things just shifted in my life. So it was a beautiful shift. And I think that that was one of those examples of precisely the right thing at the right time that then opened doors. And the way that I met you was through a friend of ours connecting.
Who was that?
It was
Fadea. Yeah, Fadea. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So we didn't meet at a workshop.
Mm-hmm.
We just, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think my mind filled it in that we met at a workshop or something like that. Funny how the mind works.
Totally.
Doctor. Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. And so, yeah. And it was just amazing. And I've gone to a few of the Dr. Joe workshops and have made so many wonderful friends through those experiences, and have traveled to beautiful places. And it's just been really fun. So I'm a big fan.
You've worked with a lot of these professional athletes, CEOs, et cetera, these high-powered people. What are some of their strengths and weaknesses, these patterns that you've recognized? And also, do you think these weaknesses or pains, I call them core wounds, but are they coming from a childhood thing that they are overcompensating? Or, because I know that has been in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's a beautiful way to say it, that, the core wounds. And that's the answer to the question as to what do I notice with these people, is that they're often exceptionally successful in an aspect of life, whether that aspect be their careers or artistic expression or other form of creativity, musician or athleticism. And yet they also still have core wounds, and they still have things that they grapple with, and they're still very, very human. So I think it's meeting people at their humanity and helping them with the parts of their lives where there's a little bit of a deficit and where there's still pain points, and figuring out what those pain points are and how to work with those pain points, whether through inner child work or understanding where it comes from, and giving them tools as to how to strengthen those other aspects as well.
So are those core wounds like overcompensations, would you say, that propels them to be so successful in a lot of ways?
Absolutely. So they may indeed be overcompensating for a core wound of feeling unworthy, or feeling like they're not lovable, or feeling like they don't deserve to be happy or successful or loved. And so they may constantly be overcompensating through success in this aspect of their life or this aspect of their life. And they could be compensating through success, achievement, fame, whatever that is. And it's interesting because you can think of that as a psychological addiction. None of those things like money, success, fame, achievement, those are all good things. We all want that. However, it becomes an addiction when the more of it you have, the emptier you feel. And sometimes with some of the people I work with, that is indeed the case, that they're at such a high level through overcompensation for money, status, achievement, fame, success, that the more of it they have, it doesn't fulfill them. It actually does the opposite. They feel emptier. They feel like something's missing. And it becomes more and more pronounced the more famous they become.
Have you ever seen Martin Scorsese's documentary about George Harrison living in the material world?
No.
Oh, it's one of my top documentaries. So the first half is basically his childhood leading up to the Beatles, top of the mountain. The second half is his solo career and spiritual search. But, he reached the top and he was like, this is empty. What else is there? And then he started going to India and meeting all these people. And it's an amazing story. That guy was so far ahead of his time. And I think you will really, really love it. I've shared it with so many people. And if somebody comes over and they haven't seen it, I'm like, I'll watch it again, like 3.5 hours worth, because it's just phenomenal. So I want to know more about your dark night of the soul and how that, I have this chapter in the first book, sometimes you're the bumper and sometimes you're the ball. Like, how did that alter you?
Yeah, the dark night of the soul, I felt like really uncertain about whether I wanted to continue with psychiatry because I just hated my residency. And I had just...
What did you hate about it?
I just felt like they were, in medical school and in school, like in undergrad, I really felt like you could have self-expression and be who you were. But in residency, they were trying to make everybody the same. And sometimes you have to do that in order to train a whole bunch of people. And then I was trying to do things that were a little bit different. And I've always done things that are a little different, starting a mental health and spirituality center. That's like a different, thing. And thank goodness Yale is super supportive of that. But NYU was not supportive of that. And actually I got in trouble for that in a number of different ways. And so I was at a place where I was basically told, be just like everybody else, like put your head down to the floor. And I just hated that. I hated that. I hated being in that like environment. I felt so uninspired. And it was just, I felt like in jail, and I never felt that at Yale or at Stanford in my education up to that point. So this was like this new, like jailed reality. And I'm like, okay, so maybe I just have to get through this, or I could also leave. I could leave residency. I can go to a different program. I had all of those thoughts swirling, but I was really just unhappy in residency together with, I had been dating this guy for 5 years, and we were just at a point where we're going to get married or not. And ultimately we decided not to get married. And so it was a breakup, but it was still someone who was very dear to me. So it was all of that together. And I was just like, blah, like it was blah. And then I started dating this other guy, and we were like starting to get to know each other. And then I find out he's dating like a million other people. So it was like one thing after the other. But that would, and it doesn't seem like that was a dark night of this. It could, but it totally was. It was just like the rug just being pulled out from under me, and not loving life, feeling just blah, not having the support that I needed. And all of that ultimately led to all of these things that brought me to Kabbalah, to spirituality, and to get to, the other side of it all.
So what did you have to do to get through that time for yourself? Because everybody goes through these dark nights of the soul. Some people handle it in ways of going in. Some people seek sex, drugs, anything else they can escape from. What did you do?
Yeah, I feel like the number one thing I did a number of things. I started to seek. I'm like, well, the tools that I have under my belt are not helping me sufficiently. So I need more. And so I started looking outside of my, the tools of science and psychiatry. At the same time as I also got a new psychiatrist that I started working with, who's with me to this day, who I just adore, who helped me so much. He was amazing. And so I got a new healer that I was working with, and then started to search. And I started going to different lectures about spirituality, learning this, learning that, learning this about meditation. That's how I ultimately came to Kabbalah. And that's how I got this new community that helped me to heal as well. And yeah, and I think it just gave meaning to everything. And then eventually, like I had what I wanted. I got through residency, and it was not a big deal. At the end, I was able to do what I wanted to do, which is start my practice, which has been amazing. And then to think that I was even considering giving that up for this, for something that was like this challenge in my life. It's crazy now.
Do you think that NYU experience, it was kind of almost like the indoctrination? They were trying to mold you into this thing that you were supposed to be?
Yeah, I think that, there's certain, and I also feel like I understand their point of view, because they have X number of residents who are supposed to do X number of things, and, don't stand out, get your job done, get your work done. And it was like the philosophy, the ethos. Yeah. And so, and if I had to do it again, I would just have been like, that's what it is. I wouldn't have even thought twice about it. And I wouldn't have given any meaning to it. The meaning I gave to it then was that it was like this horrible experience and I'm in jail, as opposed to, I just have to get through this to for the next stage of my life. So it was just the reframing.
Yeah. When I was in college, I was just thinking about this the other day, taking these writing classes. I would never do the assignment. I kind of spun out into my own thing because I was searching for my own voice, but they were trying to put me into this thing. So I wanted to ask you about your work with shamans, and have you done plant medicine, or do you use plant medicine with your patients?
Yeah, I mean, I have had some experiences in places where it's legal. It's obviously not legal in our country. It is legal in some other places. And so, and those experiences have been incredible. and really, really, and when I say plant medicine, there's like ayahuasca is not legal in our country at all. There is, psilocybin is legal in Oregon and now in Colorado, and it's decriminalized in other states. So yeah, I feel like those experiences and other kinds of spiritual experiences, whether through breath work, through meditation, through psychedelics, have been so profound and so powerful. And often psychedelics it's the quickest way to the top, but it's also because you don't earn it per se, it often will give you a glimpse of where you need to go, but then the experience leaves because the psychedelics wear off. So it's the question then is, how do you be able to ground into the very powerful glimpse that psychedelics give you while you're in the three-dimensional world?
What kind of insights did you have into yourself through those experiences?
Oh, I think that, the psychedelic world is really amazing on so many levels because it gives you a glimpse of what the world is like completely without the veil. With the veil, like completely taken off, and you're able to see the structure of the universe, how things work, why things work. You're able to have this deep, profound understanding. And I just remember thinking at those times when I felt that, wouldn't it be so amazing to live life at this level in this way, as opposed to having to come back where there is such a veil? And when we live day to day, we don't think that there is such a veil. And it's only when that veil is lifted that you're like, wow, we are just living in the dark. We just have this little tiny glimpse. And this is that Kabbalistic idea that what we see and what we hear is only 1% of reality. And the fact that you can be given that glimpse is just this amazing thing.
Yeah. I mean, I always say my inciting incident was taking a huge dose of mushrooms at a Grateful Dead concert at 17. And I don't know if this is the right, but I think the right analogy or metaphor, but I think of like our fascia and just like breaking out or expanding that thing. And it altered my trajectory, probably rewired my brain. I don't know nature versus nurture, whether I was bound to be a writer because of the way, I was born the youngest by 9 years, all these things. What do you think about nature versus nurture, by the way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that nature is hugely powerful and influential in terms of our genetics, our epigenetics, our, predispositions, our biological propensities, our, neurochemistry, our imbalances or balances of our neurochemistry, things of that nature. I think it's hugely important and very, very powerful in becoming, enabling us to become who we become, and that our choices in our environments are equally important. So I think both are really important. And I worked in Dr. Sapolsky's lab, and he wrote the book Determined. And according to his book, he actually believes we have no free will. And
interesting.
And that our, where we're born and our environment and basically that nature and nurture are what shapes us in large part. And that, the extent of our free will is limited to whether we brush our teeth up and down or side to side.
Wow. What do you think about that?
I think he's a genius, and I love working in his lab, and I like his argument. I don't know if I fully agree. And it's kind of a depressing, view of human nature and of our own free will or lack thereof, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I think Dr. Bruce Lipton would say probably the opposite, because epigenetics, above the mind, is what controls everything else and what controls the experience. But on the other hand, my friend Harry Massey, who I worked with, he would say when you get to a certain point on your journey, you start to lose your free will because you become in alignment with what you're doing. I don't know if that's exactly the right term, free will, but your choices kind of become more limited because they're more determined according to your alignment.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Exactly. Right. And there's, certain ways in which we want free will, and certain ways, wouldn't it be so wonderful if the universe were just to lift us up and take us to where we need to get to, knowing that it's a really good place.
Yeah. I mean, but you gotta have right action, right thinking, right feeling, and right thoughts to get you there. I believe. But so tell me about the Yale spiritual school, or that bridge you're creating.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah. So that came about. So After I completed my residency, I didn't want to be affiliated with any academic institution. I feel like residency traumatized me a little bit. So I was like, I'm just going to be free. I'm going to do my own thing. And so that's what I did. And I started my practice, which I loved. I loved being a psychiatrist. And then started with all the spiritual insights I was getting to write my book. And it was published in 2017. And it was on the interface of mental health and spirituality with 50 different cases from my private practice. And as I was talking around the country about my book, I went to Yale and spoke there. And one of my colleagues and mentors from medical school, Dr. Bob Rohrbach, said to me, you should consider coming back to Yale on faculty. And we should think about this mental health and spirituality center, starting something like that. So I was thrilled, because I loved Yale. That was a place where I felt so comfortable and so seen always. And so I came on faculty in 2017. So I thought I was done with academia for good, but I wasn't. And in 2017, came back onto faculty at Yale. And that's when we started talking about this mental health and spirituality center. But it was interesting because I knocked on a few doors and it was clear it was not time. And then a few years passed. And then I actually went to a Joe Dispenza retreat. And at the Joe Dispenza retreat, I heard a voice during one of the meditations, the time for your center is now. Go knock on the doors again. And I went to knock on the doors again. That was, I think, in like 2022. I went to knock on the doors again. And this time the doors swung wide open. And the chair of psychiatry was like, this is a very important project. And then he got one of the associate deputy chairs, Chris Pittenger, to come on board. And he and I together have started working on the center. And that was, 2.5 years ago. And so now we're in process with all this. We have activities where we're doing it basically. I mean, we are also fundraising in order to create the center, but we are basically doing this. And there's other, places around the country like Harvard and Hopkins who are doing similar centers, sometimes through the lens of psychedelics and sometimes not. But this is something that I think is so important, and it's changing the landscape of our modern psychiatry.
So what is the goal of it?
Yeah, the goal is to create a space. And so I'll tell you the goal of this center, but my goal is actually bigger than just Yale. My goal for the broader, psychiatric framework is to create a space where mind, body, and spirit are all taken into account and valued equally in treating psychiatric conditions. Because I mentioned to you before that currently the psychiatric framework is very brain and mind focused, brain focused through psychopharmacology, mind focused through psychotherapy, and body and spirit are missing. So it's to bring body and spirit back into psychiatry. And that's essentially what this center will do. And the vision is for this to happen at the top 10 academic institutions around the country. And then at every other academic institution to have a small center, a center for continuing learning, to be able to have information about this. The larger centers will focus on research priorities, on educational opportunities, conferences, grants, etc., and also on clinical work, on the clinical care of patients. And the smaller centers for continuing learning will be primarily educational. And hopefully every institution will have something like that within about 10, 15 years. That's the vision.
So in your opinion, what's the biggest misconception about spirituality and mental health treatment?
I think people don't recognize and don't know the research about how important spirituality is to our mental and physical well-being. And there is tons and tons of research on that subject. And I can tell you about some of it if you're interested. Essentially, I'll take you back a little bit. It all started way back in the time of Sigmund Freud, right? He believed that religion was essentially a universal obsessional neurosis of humanity, and that religious ideas were illusions and basically fulfillment of our oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes, but essentially illusions. And then it was Carl Jung who acknowledged that the spiritual connection was central and core to the human experience. He believed that we were born whole and that we lose this sense of wholeness as we go through life, and that connecting to this unity and our own transcendent nature was for Jung a way to restore our inherent wholeness. And it was Einstein who best reconciled this, basically saying that science without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. And so there's a lot within psychiatry from the days of Freud, which was very much anti-spirituality. And that's where a lot of this comes from. But now there is so much research showing how powerful spirituality is for both well-being in terms of spirituality improving physical health, mental health, subjective well-being, reducing addictions, psychological distress, and reducing suicidality. And so by virtue of that, and I can give you more specifics if you're interested, but by virtue of that, it's been shown over and over again that spirituality helps people be happier and live longer.
So Freud, good or bad, or what's your thoughts on Freud?
Neither good nor bad. That was just his view. And he contributed a ton to the psychiatric profession. Psychodynamic therapy is largely due to Freud's brilliance. He was one of the pioneers of the unconscious and the fact that the unconscious aspect of human life must be revealed. So in therapy, you help to bring the unconscious into consciousness and thereby give clients and patients more control over their life. So I think Freud was brilliant, but he was not into spirituality.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Human civilization is kind of the history of thoughts. And I kind of think Darwin and Freud sort of threw us off track a little bit. Darwin, survival of the fittest, where he was actually talking about his class, the aristocracy, when now we know it's the survival of the community from the cells all the way on up. And Freud, his whole thing. But where do you see this all going? Where do you see your work in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I see myself like essentially as part of this paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is what's ushering in a new understanding of human nature and how we exist as human beings, that we're not just bodies, that we're also souls, and that we're souls with a purpose, with a transcendent self. And that's a very deep part of our work in psychiatry and medicine in general. So I'm here to usher in the new paradigm of medicine. So mind, body, spirit medicine. And so we're creating, with some colleagues of mine, the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute and the Mind, Body, Spirit Foundation. So we have a number of different things that we're doing in this regard. And we're working with numerous institutions, including Yale, to, penetrate this into the academic circles, because it has to go.
Are many of your contemporaries sort of not including that spirituality piece, or are they waking up to it?
I think people are more receptive and open to it. And I think that receptivity has come in part due to psychedelics, because psychedelics not only offer a novel biological mechanism to treating some of our most treatment-resistant mental health conditions, it also, for many, offers a connection to spirit. And so it was in that way that I think many people are introduced, like seeing that their clients have powerful psychedelic spiritual experiences, and they're incredibly helpful to them. So that makes people curious. But many of my contemporaries know psychiatry is kind of is a non-religious, non-spiritual, historically, profession. And of course, now, things are changing and there's obviously different people doing different things. But yeah, historically, the perspective of Freud was the dominant perspective.
Yeah, I think if we reoriented our perspective and paradigm to put spirituality in the spoke of that wheel, it would transform so many other aspects of our own individual lives and our society, perhaps through the mechanism of compassion. But would you say that spirituality is that center spoke in sort of your book of Fulfilled?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for someone struggling to find their purpose, what advice would you offer them to find their way on their journey?
Yeah. So helping people with their purpose. It's one of my favorite things that I love to do. And I have younger people, but also older people who've achieved success. What's my next step? What is your purpose? And so, I have them think about 20 different iterations of what could your purpose possibly be. And then I have them ask for signs. And what would a sign look like? What would it mean to be able to have clarity? I have them imagine being clear about the answer to that question now. And then I have them also work with individuals who they trust to ask their questions and to figure out which of the 20 iterations is indeed their purpose, or is it something that they haven't even conceived of yet?
So do you think that, if you say you're thinking about buying a green car and then you see green cars everywhere on the highway. Do you think that you're just tuning your brain into that when you're looking for spiritual breadcrumbs, or is it actually the universe reaching out to you?
I think it's a great question, and it's probably a combination of both, and I think it depends on the person.
How about you?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think that my awareness is what creates my reality, and my awareness is also what magnetizes in the reality I seek.
I love that. So what about your next book, Miracles?
Yes. So
Tell us about that.
Yes. My first book's on the science of spirituality, and this book is on the science of miracles. And with a miracle being defined as something highly beneficial, yet statistically improbable. And so the question will be, how can we increase the likelihood of miracles in our life? And I think it's really about what you just said, Tim. It's a number of things. It's tuning in our awareness and becoming magnets. And when you think about manifestation, there's multiple theories as to how we manifest. One of the manifestations that we all know well, two types of ways of manifesting, is going and working really hard and deliberately planning and putting in the effort in the three-dimensional world and making it happen. Most of us who've gone to professional school, who've written books, etc., that's how we have made things happen. We've manifested through our labor. And then there's the other ways. And the other way is, if the first one is the masculine way, this one is the feminine way. It's manifesting not by doing, but by being. And being is essentially setting your intention and then getting to a vibrational frequency that is equal to that intention. And so you have to figure out, what are the blockages to you being able to be the best version of yourself, to you being fully in joy and happiness and resonant with the reality that you yourself want. And then in that reality, as you achieve it, you begin to magnetize in what you most deeply want. So it's essentially becoming the magnet, and the more feminine way. It's a more passive way, but often just as, if not more effective.
I like that. Dr. Joe always says gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership, but you also there has to be allowance. And perhaps that's the being part. You have to allow it, because I think a lot of times in my life, I've not allowed it out of fear or out of unconsciously afraid to become my fullest potential. But, what I'm learning now is sort of, I almost said the passivity of allowance, but there's also an action involved in it as well. And maybe that's just the openness, like you said.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. That it seems like a passive process, but actually it's a very active process. Being is an active process. It's an active state. There's a receivership. So it's like you're open to receiving, which is more of a passive process. And yet to be in that high vibe, that takes work for a lot of people. Some people exist there, naturally, but for a lot of other people, they really have to get to have some work to get there.
I'll ask you one last topic. I'm curious. Are you studying longevity at all, or are you involved in longevity at all?
Definitely. Yes, I am very interested in it because I feel like that's also, and I actually give a talk at many longevity conferences on mental health and spirituality as two often overlooked factors for prolonging health span and lifespan. And it's true, because individuals with chronic mental health conditions on average live 25 years less, which is a lot of years.
Wow. That's a lot.
And spirituality on average can increase your longevity by 9 to 15 years, depending who you ask.
Wow. I never really thought about longevity until this past weekend. I was at the Conference for Consciousness and Human Potential in San Diego. And this one doctor was talking, and it was the fact that the longer you live, this body is the vehicle and the receptacle of knowledge and wisdom experience. The longer you live, the more spiritual knowledge you can acquire. And if our purpose here is to evolve our soul, then, imagine what you could get to if you're living a long, healthy life, to have all of that knowledge and spiritual wisdom within you.
It's amazing. Exactly. That's exactly right. Exactly. I think there's something really, really amazing. And as people get older, they have more wisdom. And so God willing that they also stay healthy, that they're able to share that wisdom, and that we value individuals as they age in a way that enables them to share that wisdom. So all of that, I agree.
So what's next for you? What are you What are you passionate about? What are you putting your energy towards? Are you also in the process of finishing up a documentary or shooting a documentary?
Yes, I'm working with my friend on that, Neha Logia. She is helping me to produce a documentary also on mental health and spirituality, but specifically on telepathy and on this connection between minds. So we're in the process of working on that. And so I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about a birthday trip I'm taking with some dear friends to Cabo this month. So that's going to be fun. And and the new book project.
Awesome. Have you heard the telepathy tapes yet?
Yes. And that is with my friend, Diane Hennessy Powell. And she's been doing this work for a while with autism and individuals with autism having telepathic capacities. It's amazing. It's so powerful and so interesting.
Yeah, I sent it to everybody I know. And it actually became, at one point, at its peak, the most popular podcast in the world, which is amazing. And, Dr. Zach Bush has been saying for a really long time that these kids hold the keys to the next evolution of our species because they're not born with guilt or shame or anything like that. What do you think is the effects? One more question for you. What do you think is the effects of guilt and shame in our lives? Because that seems to be, we've all got it from some core wound in the past, but I had this huge realization about 2 years ago and I had to add another chapter in my book because it was so big and it floored me, which you'll have to wait for the book for that one. But what do you think how does that affect us?
I think that guilt and shame are two incredibly powerful and important features of the human experience that most people will have at some point. And they are two things that need to be overcome, essentially. And you can gain a great deal of insight from an individual, from their family, from how they see the world, from their self-concept through an examination of their guilt and shame. But they're like baggage that we carry. And ultimately, we have to learn to unpack, to better understand, and to be able to move past to the best of our abilities. And as we do that, we elevate our consciousness in very profound ways and our lives improve.
Do you move past or do you transmute and integrate it?
Exactly. And that's essentially what moving past is. It's transmute and integrate, right? It's like the same idea as we were talking before with fear. What you resist persists. You can't just push it away. I don't have guilt. I don't have shame, because what you don't own owns you. What you have to do is understand it and integrate it and metabolize it in a way that works with your self-concept and to really, similar to fear, you put it in the passenger seat, you're in the driver's seat, and that you understand where it is. And when it comes up, it gives you important guideposts to how you're living your life and what's happening.
And feeling is healing, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So whatever feelings come up, that's part of the metabolizing it and to allow yourself to, get to the next level with it.
Awesome. Well, where can people find you?
You can find me at www.annayusim.com, and wherever books are sold, my book Fulfilled is there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Looking forward to more conversations in the future and seeing where and how our paths intersect. And really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and wisdom and time with us.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks. You can follow this on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, subscribe, all that jazz. I always feel like I have to say that because it really helps. But anyway, until next time, over and out. Have a great day.